Now, up to 700 Palestinian children are arrested every year, and many are physically abused and denied access to their parents or a lawyer. That's according to a team of British lawyers who visited Israel. They accuse Israel's security forces of regularly breaching the UN Convention on Children's Rights.
Yes, we are bound to Israel because of the interests that we share. But ultimately, it is our common ideals. We agree on the big things, the things that matter.
Every 12 hours, a Palestinian child is arrested. In the last 6 years, 5,200 have been imprisoned by Israel. Their crimes, defiance against the state they blame for their misery.
Today's report concludes that Israel's treatment of child prisoners breaches the Geneva Conventions and the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child.
I want to tell you that the United Kingdom believes that Israel has a vital role to play in its region and the world, and that Israel's well-being matters deeply to us.
Filmed by a local cameraman, 12-year-old Rakan Insaret was Israel's youngest convict. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail after a 2-year trial.
There is a problem with violence. Rock throwing Molotov cocktails, other forms of violence is unacceptable, and of course the security authorities have to bring it to an end when it happens.
As night follows day, everyone knows that if a military convoy enters a Palestinian village, the young men and boys will throw stones at it.
They are provoked and encouraged to retaliate, children as young as 8 full of anger.
The root cause of this is the settlements. And if those settlements don't go anywhere, this is going to continue.
Mohammed Salem Abu Eid was 14 years old when he was detained by Israeli forces last year. He was accused of throwing stones at the separation wall which cuts through the Palestinian West Bank.
I think that the real tragedy here is the fact that youth, these ages, go to the streets and use a deadly means, which is rocks, that have killed in the past, that have hurt in the past. I think they're being exploited despite of their young age.
Article 40 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child addresses juvenile justice. And while Israel is a signatory to the convention, stories of child abuse at its hands continue to surface.
I was handcuffed and holding on to the chair with my hands. They tried to insert a plastic stick inside me. They tried to sodomize me with it. I fell forward and tried to move away.
If detainees believe they have been mistreated, it's very important that these people, or people representing them, come forward and raise these issues.
The military was unable to comment specifically on this case because CNN is complying with the family's request not to reveal his identity. They fear retribution.
The test of a democracy is how you treat people incarcerated, people in jail, and especially so with minors.
I don't think you can have a military occupation that lasts more than a few months that will not violate both humanitarian law and human rights law.
The world needs Israel's strength as a regional bulwark for good. The world needs Israel's values of tolerance and justice, those values clear and strong, and rejecting all challenges to them and those who would corrode them.
I'm going to say a few words about Palestinian children detained in the military court system, and I'll also give some information about some of the findings that we made in this report, Bound, Blindfolded and Convicted.
These are the pictures children draw here. Soldiers with guns, barbed wire, prison bars and rats.
Together, we are working to build a better world, one where our people can live free from fear, one where peace is founded upon justice, one where our children can know a future that is more hopeful than the present.
At a time when the protection and well-being of our young has never been more scrutinized, here is a nation embraced by Western leaders as a fellow democracy and a force for good, whose abuse of minors is not a matter of culture, complacency, or societal failure, but a strategic part of its policy for the domination and demoralization of an occupied people. It declared itself in 1948 as a Jewish state for the world's Jewish people.
The city of Haifa and its harbor become the center of bitter conflict as the new Jewish state is born. Arab captives are held for evacuation to Acre. Women flee with what belongings they can carry. And as Palestine struggles for national existence, the conflict catches the inevitable innocent in its toil. After 2,000 years, a Jewish nation once again exists. And while there is a rattle of gunfire in the Holy Land, there is cheering in Washington and Hebrew dances of joy for a Jewish homeland that has been reborn.
In line with Israel's vision for its Zionist state, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs were forced out of their villages and homes and never allowed back. But this created its own problems for Israel, with a vast number of resentful and dispossessed people now resident in the surrounding territories. In a military campaign widely admired by her Western allies as bold and brilliant, Israel's preemptive strike in June 1967 against a build-up of Arab forces on its borders was swift and brutal, but without doubt a resounding success. The Six-Day War left Israel with captured land amounting to many times its own size, but with that came the new challenge of controlling a largely hostile population, most of whom were Palestinians, and many of them uncompensated refugees. 45 years later, and this challenge of control remains unchanged. And for Zionists, the Palestinian problem is more acute than ever. Regardless of future political solutions, two states or one, binational government or demilitarized Palestinian Bantustans, the end of Zionism or a greater Israel, what is beyond doubt are the current facts on the ground. Over 500,000 Jewish Israeli settlers on land acquired by war, and 2.6 million West Bank Palestinians subject to Israeli military law.
Since June 1967, Israeli military commanders have issued military orders which bind 2.5 million Palestinians, and none of those Palestinians have any say whatsoever as to how that executive, legislative or judicial authority is exercised over them.
In the West Bank, it's army law, it's martial law, and it's not by the people for the people, it's by Israel for Israel.
Armies are not designed to control civilians. If you're going to do military occupation, this is what it looks like.
I need my brother. He shot me. He shot me because I tell him I need my brother.
According to the UN, since June 1967, they have prosecuted and imprisoned conservatively around 730,000 men, women and children. About 1 in 4 men in the West Bank have been through this military court system.
Case 1079 in 1989. The defendant, 16 years of age, threw stones at armed forces personnel in her village, as well as slapped an army officer while he was attempting to arrest her. Found guilty as charged based on her confession.
And so the Israeli army are basically there sitting in judgment on the Palestinian people.
There is a military order that has been in place since 1967, which makes it a criminal offence for more than 10 Palestinians to gather together to discuss politics.
Case 2252 in 1989. The defendant is accused in taking part in an illegal assembly, spray painting slogans against the Israeli Defense Forces, and taking part in the burning of an Israeli bus.
Amongst the judges, and we took note of those who were sitting as judges, were even people who were settlers.
I realize that I'm sent to the West Bank by the Israeli flag. And the people who sit here opposite it view it as the flag of the enemy, and I represent that flag.
בעלי תפקידים בארץ שתפקידם לשמור על חייך. אתה לא תמיד יודע מה הם עושים, אתה לא תמיד יודע איך הם עושים, והם על גבול החוקי והלא חוקי.
במדים, אתה מייצג את צה"ל, אתה מייצג את החלק הנכבד בחברה הישראלית, שיש לה דעות מאוד מובנות, שאנחנו זה אנחנו והם זה הם.
Interestingly, the settlers are technically subject to Israeli military law, but no Israeli settler is ever prosecuted in the military courts. They're treated as anyone living in Tel Aviv. Imagine you're in the West Bank and there are 2 children there. One is a settler child and one is a Palestinian child. And those 2 children pick up stones and start throwing stones at each other, which happens. Let's see how the legal systems apply to those 2 children. Looking first at the settler child. Israel's civilian youth law will be applied to that child, not the military law. He cannot be arrested at night, except in extreme circumstances. His door is not going to be kicked in by the army. He will be asked to come down to the police station with his parents during the day. He will get to see a lawyer before he's questioned. The lawyer will tell him he has the right to silence. His mother or father can accompany him during the interrogation. He has an 80% chance of being released on bail. If he's convicted of an offence, he can only get a custodial sentence if he's 14 above, and then he's only got a 6.5% chance of getting a custodial sentence. Palestinian child, same territory, same offence, will be prosecuted under military law. He'll be arrested in the manner I described. He will not get to see a lawyer prior to interrogation, will not have a mother present or father present, will be denied bail and will almost certainly go to prison. That is pure discrimination based on race, origin, religion, etc., which is illegal under the various conventions that Israel has signed up to. I think it's quite interesting to look at it from the Israeli military's perspective. They're tasked with the mission of protecting, in the West Bank, over 300,000 Israeli civilians living there, to guarantee that no one's going to throw stones at someone going to and from work. The solution that's been devised, I think, one, is extremely effective. From a military perspective, it may be the only strategy that would actually work. And what it is basically collective punishment. However, it's not legal. You treat the whole village as a threat and crush the resistance, any sort of resistance, whether it's peaceful or otherwise. And I'll refer you to a report that was published by the Israeli organization Breaking the Silence, made up of former Israeli soldiers.
I served from November 2004 till 2007. Even people that were totally with the mission, no questions, they realized that there's this crazy gap between what they're doing inside the army, day in and day out, and what their family, friends, communities know about back home.
This report is called Children and Youth Soldiers' Testimonies 2005 to 2011. What the soldier in the first testimony says is that they would go into a Palestinian village, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day, even when nothing has happened, even when they weren't there to arrest anyone. And the reason they would do that, in his own words, is to grind the local population down, to make their life as miserable as possible, so that the people in that village not only would not throw stones, but they would not even think about throwing stones. And he says it's actually very successful. He said that the villagers just, through fear, shut themselves away. The first thing that struck us, I think, as interesting was precisely where the children are being arrested from. And the children, we found, were basically being arrested from the friction points, where a settlement has been built close to a Palestinian village, where a road used by the Israeli army or settlers passes close to a Palestinian village. And at these friction points, frequently on Fridays, there'll be demonstrations, a degree of tear gas is fired, rubber bullets, in many cases stones are thrown, and arrests are made. In a village called Bet Uma, between Hebron and Bethlehem, that village has a demonstration each Saturday, I think, against the nearby settlement, and the authorities are very keen to crush that. What's happening in the West Bank is that where there is a Friday protest, or people are throwing stones a lot, you will find those are the villages that get night raids frequently.
We started doing our actual service after almost a year, a couple of months of training. We started entering houses on a nightly basis and searching houses on a nightly basis, or going in to arrest people in the middle of the night. You realize that it's impossible to be moral in an immoral situation.
Let's say a military vehicle is traveling near to a Palestinian village and a stone hits the outside of that vehicle. The chances of the army being able to identify the perpetrator are next to nil. What the army will do next is the intelligence officer in the area will make an assumption that the stone throws came from the nearest village. The next thing that intelligence officer will do is he will go through the records of who have they arrested in that village before. Something like 1 in 4 men have been through this system. You can be quite sure that a number of people in that village will have been arrested before. Two or 3 nights later, 20 to 30 military vehicles will go into that village, usually between the hours of midnight and 5 o'clock in the morning. The intelligence is excellent. The army knows precisely where the people live, who they've come to arrest. The village of An Nabi Saleh, 17 kilometers north of Ramallah, in August was raided on 16 nights. The first thing the child knows about this is usually there's a lot of yelling and screaming outside. Someone will have a megaphone and will be either calling out in Hebrew or in Arabic, identifying that the Israeli army is outside. What we've noticed in some of the night raids is the soldiers will come into that village not to arrest anyone. For example, last month soldiers came into one house in that village. They did not tell the family why they were in the house. They took the hard drives out of all the computers. They then went through documents, including the title deeds, original title deeds to the land. And the father was beside himself, for obvious reasons, saying, at least give me a receipt, tell me why are you doing this? They didn't say a word, and then they went to do it in the next house. Some of these houses would be raided 2 to 3 times a night, children arrested. In one particular case, the mother, every time a child is taken away, she basically emotionally collapses and just ceases to function. The rest of the family just gathers around her bed, trying to will her to get out of bed until the next nighttime arrest. We took an American psychiatrist to Bet Uma to interview some of the women. Her background was working with trauma victims from 9/11 in Manhattan. And she said she had never seen anything like what she saw in Betuma. She described the situation as a trauma vortex, and that some of these women as having suffered psychic death. Very rarely are the parents told why their child has been arrested or where their child has been taken to in the middle of the night. The child will have his hands immediately tied behind his back, usually with a single plastic tie. These are the ties that can be tightened, but they can't be loosened. In 90% of the cases we documented, the child will also be blindfolded. And remember, this is children as young as 12 years of age. In some cases, the commanding officer will not allow the child to get dressed. So the child will be tied, blindfolded, and taken out of the house in his pajamas, sometimes without shoes on. So you can imagine this chaos of these soldiers coming into the house. Everyone has just woken up, so they're in a state of confusion. The child is tied and blindfolded. You're not told where they're being taken to. The younger siblings are usually screaming and crying because they're scared. And then the soldiers take your son out into the night. In 32% of the cases we documented, the children say they were placed on the metal floor of the military vehicle for transfer. The road system in the West Bank is quite bumpy. These trips can take 20 minutes, they can take several hours. The child will be bumping up and down on the metal floor, tied and blindfolded. Most of the children report some form of abuse occurring in the back of the vehicle. From the soldiers' perspective, they would probably say at best it's horseplay. The children report that the soldiers often put their boots on the child. They'll be pushed from one soldier to the other soldier across the width of the vehicle. In some cases it's more serious, consisting of slapping and kicking the child. Verbal abuse is usually directed at the child's mother or sister. 2 weeks ago we collected an affidavit where a child said that he asked for something to drink. He was given something to drink. It was very bitter, he spat it out, he thinks it was beer. He was a Muslim child. And then he heard laughter from the soldiers. The children who are accused of throwing stones, they're handed over to the Israeli police inside the settlements for interrogation. These police interrogators seem not to start work until about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. So the army's got to figure out what do we do with these children between 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever the arrest was conducted and 8 o'clock. Most of the settlements have small enclosures for the military, consisting of shipping containers, prefabricated buildings, that sort of thing. The soldiers will take the children out of the back, still tied and blindfolded, and quite often simply just leave them on the ground, outside. In other cases, the children are placed inside the shipping containers, which is slightly better, particularly if it's raining. 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, the children will be placed back in the military vehicle and then taken to one of the police stations. Most of the children currently are being interrogated in the police station in Gush Etzion settlement block between Hebron and Bethlehem. That's if they're arrested in the south of the West Bank. If they're arrested in the north of the West Bank, they're generally taken to the police station in Ariel. The child will arrive at that police station. He won't have slept. Children report if they try to sleep when they're sitting on the ground, a soldier will kick them. So he'll be sleep deprived, thirsty, hungry, scared, bruised, and his hands now will have been tied for many hours. The interrogator will usually start by making a very general allegation against the child. The interrogator then will simply do what is necessary to get a confession. If the child is 12, you won't have to do very much. The interrogator will want to know who that child's friends are. We'll try to recruit them as an informant. All the children tell us that they rebuff these advances. No one obviously is going to put up their hands to being an informant. But if a child as young as 12 is placed under that sort of pressure, and indeed an adult, it stands to reason that in some cases informants would be recruited. People are very suspicious sometimes of their neighbours, their fear that they have been recruited. The sort of threats we've documented are threats of physical violence, threats of long-term detention. The interrogator will generally know if the child's father has a work permit to work inside Israel. A threat to revoke that father's work permit has a profound effect on anyone.
This is rare footage of a 14-year-old interrogated by Israeli officers last year. The questioning lasts over 5 hours and the child is clearly exhausted. At one point he starts sobbing. Neither his parents nor a lawyer are in the room.
If the threats don't work, then it might become physical, kicking the child, pushing the child off the chair. In 2010, we documented 3 cases where the children say that they were interrogated in the police station in Ariel and the interrogator tasered them. In 12% of the cases we've documented, the children were held in solitary confinement, in cells without windows where the light is left on 24 hours a day. What some of the children tell us is that they become so starved of human contact that when they meet with the interrogator, they will, one, almost say anything, and they will try to prolong the conversation because they just want human contact. The situation for children in solitary confinement is so profound that the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture submitted a report to the UN General Assembly in October last year, saying in the case of children, solitary confinement must be absolutely prohibited because in many cases, if not most cases, it amounts to torture.
The World Organization Against Torture, known as OMCT, has sent an open letter to the Israeli Prime Minister asking him to look into accusations of abuse. Mr. Netanyahu's office referred CNN to the military. The military chose not to comment specifically on the OMCT letter, saying simply all complaints should be sent directly to them.
Following the interrogation, the child must be brought before a military court judge within 4 days. It's inside the military courtroom where the child will see his lawyer for the very first time. By that stage, there's not much a lawyer can do for a child. He's already been interrogated, wasn't informed of his rights, and has probably already provided a confession. Pretty much all of these children are telling us they were coerced into signing confessions, and yet the lawyers aren't challenging the system. In 29% of the cases, they were either shown or made to sign documents written in Hebrew. What is perhaps even more extraordinary is those documents then form part of the military court file. The military court judges have access to these documents, and the military court prosecutors have access to these documents. And in the 6 years I've been doing this work, not a single judge or prosecutor has ever raised an eyebrow as to why these children are signing documents in a language they don't understand. Even if the child says he's innocent, in very few cases are children released on bail. Our lawyer will give the child 2 options. The child can plead guilty, whether he did it or not, and get, it can be as little as 10 days, it can be as much sometimes as 10 months for children. If the child says, defend me, I didn't do it, our lawyer will have to tell that child, you will remain in detention, you will not be released on bail. Your case will not come on for final hearing for 4 to 6 months. You're going to spend longer in prison if you try to fight this. The quickest way out of the system is to plead guilty. In about 60% of the cases, the children are transferred out of the West Bank to prisons inside Israel, in violation of Article 76 of the 4th Geneva Convention, which prohibits transfer of prisoners out of occupied territory to somewhere else. Not only is this illegal, but it has practical consequences. It makes it difficult for parents to visit their children. You have to apply for a permit. That initial permit can take 1 to 2 months to get. So we've had cases where a child has been released from prison and the next day the permit shows up allowing the parents to visit the child. Once you get a permit, it entitles you to visit your child in prison once every 2 weeks for 45 minutes. 2 family members can visit. It's non-contact, so it's behind security glass. Many people are denied permits for unspecified security reasons. Perhaps it's because a parent went through this system too, but who would know? You're not told. When we talk to the boys when they come out of the system, if you ask them, are they experiencing any problems, etc., they'll say no, they're fine, no ill effects whatsoever. You've resisted, you're a local hero. What the mothers tell you is that the boy has nightmares, that the boy wets his bed, that the boy's academic career has collapsed. Talking to psychiatrists about this issue, most confirm that most of these children come out with some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Other than sort of bring this to people's attention, it's very difficult to know as a lawyer how to address a problem such as this. The Guardian has reported on it on quite a number of occasions. The BBC actually even has reported on this on 2 occasions at least. We've done a lot of work with the trade unions. National Union of Teachers, UCU, and also Unite have taken this issue up. The key to this, though, I think for success, we have to start moving this issue from the left to the centre and the centre to the right. So we're doing work with the evangelical churches in America, the African American churches in America, and the Jewish community in New York. You need personal introductions to people who are not the usual suspects. Give them a presentation, and then they can introduce you to their wider network. To give you a brief, very quick example of that, we were introduced to a Republican member of Congress for Northern Kentucky, and we managed to get him across the Green Line to Ann Nabi Saleh with his wife. He basically did a 180-degree turn. Following that, he invited us to Cincinnati to give a presentation in a private apartment. He invited 60 of his power base. They were all Republicans, some of them are Christian Zionists. There was a member of the US Senate, some judges, and basically the people who fund his campaign. I have to say it's the strangest presentation I've ever given because I didn't know what the reaction would be. But at the end of it, he said 57 people out of the 60 were very supportive. One comment that sticks in my mind was a woman came up to me afterwards and said, "Hell, if that happened here, we would get our guns." And I had to sort of say, well, it's not what we're advocating for, but just a little bit of a balanced foreign policy would be nice. What we're asking for is every child must have access to a lawyer before they're interrogated. Under military law, they have the right to silence. They're not being told they have the right to silence. Every child must be allowed to be accompanied by a parent during their interrogation. It's less likely that an interrogator will slap a child or coerce a child if the parent is present. Every interrogation must be audio-visually recorded. That not only protects the children, it provides some protection to the interrogators in cases of false allegations of wrongdoing. This is not unique to the Israeli army. In any situation where an army is given the task of controlling a civilian population, you will get things like this occurring. The problem here is the length of time. This has been going on for 45 years, so the behaviour becomes more entrenched, more institutionalised, to the point where I think people don't really see that what they're doing is wrong.
I thought I could be that soldier standing in a checkpoint and smiling while cars passing by, or I could enter a house but walk around with candies in my pockets and conduct a moral occupation, right? Which took me a while, but I realized this is a contradiction in terms.
After 2 attempts to kill himself in his cell, the Israeli authorities released Rakan. As Rakan made his way down this road to a remote Israeli military checkpoint, he was fired upon several times and killed. He wasn't armed, and he wasn't carrying explosives. Only Rakan will know why he waved around what turned out to be a cigarette lighter in the shape of a gun. His mother believes he provoked his own death. She holds every side in the conflict responsible for his suicide.
What was that?
She told me anyone with a mind, a conscience, we all should learn lessons from what happened to my son.
These children have legal rights, and regardless of what the children are accused of, They should be entitled to the same rights and protections, we say, as Israeli children.